The Star Guards are back. Well, sort of. Time for another Win with Necrons video. Oh please, Games Workshop, make me a Star Guard again.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, another Win with Necrons video, and in this one we're going to have a look at the Catan shards, the Nightbringer and the Deceiver in the Necron Index. Before that though, if you would like to keep up to date with the wonders of Warhammer 40k, then please give me a sub and hit the bell button so you don't miss an upload. Okay, so the Catan shards in 8th edition, definitely more usable than they were before, and the main reason for that, as we're going to have a look in a minute at their stats, is because they are now characters and they have less than 10 wounds, so it is more difficult to target them. Now, to be fair, regardless of the other stats, if it wasn't for that particular rule, then probably these Catans wouldn't be any good on the table. But they do have that rule, and that really helps. Now, they're nowhere near as good as they used to be when they used to be actual Star Guards, but even so, they're definitely playable, they're definitely usable, and they're actually reasonably priced in points. So first of all, let's take a look at the Nightbringer. So the Nightbringer moves 8 inches, which is reasonably fast. He has a weapon skill and a ballistic skill of 2+, pretty awesome. He's strength 7 and toughness 7, and he has 8 wounds, which is pretty important there. 8 wounds character, which means he can't be targeted unless he's the closest model. And then he has 4 attacks. Not that great, to be fair, considering that he's supposed to be a shard of a guard, but anyway, 4 attacks is his stats. Leadership 10, as you would expect, and then a 4+ save. He also has a 4+ invulnerable save because of the Necrodemus. Not that great, but at least he does have some protection with that character status. Okay, so the Nightbringer has some pretty decent stats there, as you can see. Not only that, it has the powers of the Catan, which we'll talk about in a second, and it also has the Gaze of Death. Now, the Gaze of Death is basically a short-range gun, so it's a 12-inch gun, and it does D6 amount of hits. So it is a random amount of hits, and you could roll good, you could roll bad. You do have the option to re-roll the dice with a command point, but you're probably saving that for other stuff, like wounding with destroyers or auto pass on morale. Now, having said that, these shots that do get through will be hitting on 2s. So 2+ to hit, and then against anything that isn't a vehicle, you'll be wounding on 2s as well. Now you'll be wounding on 6s against vehicles, so you don't really want to be shooting this at a vehicle. This is designed for troops, and that's reinforced by the fact that it's AP -4. And it actually does D3 damage as well for each wound. So pretty good if you can go up against multiple wounded things like monstrous creatures. So in close combat, the Nightbringer has a scythe, and this has the potential to do a reasonable amount of damage. Sadly, these Catans don't have an amazing amount of attacks, which is a bit disappointing. However, when the attacks get through, they do D6 damage. Again, it's random, but you do have the potential to do a reasonable amount of damage with these guys if you do get them into the assault. And once again, these attacks are -4 AP. And one thing to try to avoid, if you can, going into units that have a good invulnerable save, like storm shields for example, because all of your power that you have with the Catan with those very limited amounts of attacks just is nullified basically with that 3+ invulnerable save. So something just to be mindful. You really want to be attacking the right type of units, ideally stuff that has multiple wounds so you can take advantage of your D6 wounding, and then ideally stuff that's not going to be able to handle the -4 AP. Now we're going to talk about the powers of the Catan right at the end of this, because it involves both the Nightbringer and the Deceiver, so I can sort of switch from one unit to the other quite easily. But the other things to note with the Nightbringer is it does explode, and actually explodes fairly easy. You've got a 50% chance of it exploding, and exploding with the Nightbringer is good. So it's a 4+ roll, and on a 4+ roll, any units within 3 inches take D3 mortal wounds. So the Nightbringer is definitely a model you want to try and get into close combat with as soon as you can, and also within as range of as many units as you can, because he will die. He doesn't have the ability to stay around too long. A 4+ invulnerable save with 8 wounds sounds good, but in 8th edition it's not hugely good, and he will definitely die. Of course, he's quite well protected at the beginning of the game with the character special rule, but once he gets into close combat and he gets attacking, he will be taken out quite easily. But if you can get the assault off, hopefully do some reasonable damage first, and then if he does die and hopefully explodes, and I would use a command point to try and get him to explode, especially if there are quite a few units around him. I think it's worthwhile. And of course, when I say you've got to get him into close combat near your enemy, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to push him forward. You have to obviously work out what your enemy is going to be doing. So if your enemy has quite a lot of deep striking units, for example, very fast units, or indeed if your enemy starts deploying the objectives over in your deployment zone, that makes it very clear that he plans to come on your side of the table. So potentially you may not necessarily have to charge him forward. It might be better off actually holding him back, playing a little bit more of a defensive role, and then when your enemy is in close, then make your advance and charge through to your enemy in that way. So just be mindful of that. It's not necessarily always about sticking him up front and just pushing him forward. There are other means to using him. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the powers of the Catan, and this is for both models. Now it's very interesting this, because you can choose your power, or you can roll randomly. Now you would have thought, well, why would anyone want to roll randomly? Well, I have to be totally honest with you, I have been rolling randomly on this chart, and the reason for that is I can't as yet decide which powers I think are the best. And in some ways that's good, because there's no standout power. Then it makes that rolling for your power a little bit more fun, and I like doing that. But yeah, let's have a quick look at the powers. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly read from the powers. So we've got Antimatter Meteor, and that's roll a d6. On a 2+, the closest visible enemy unit within 24 inches of the Catan shard suffers d3 mortal wounds. So that's a good chance of hitting, so it hits on a 2, so unless you rolled a 1 you hit, and then you've got a d3 amount of mortal wounds, so between 1 and 3 mortal wounds, quite reasonable. The second one is Times Arrow. Pick a visible unit within 24 inches of the Catan shard and roll a d6. If the result is higher than the unit's wound characteristics, one model from the unit is slain. So again, you've got a chance of slaying a multiple wounded model, pretty decent. And then you've got, lastly, Seismic Assault. Roll a d6 for each model in the closest enemy unit within 24 inches of the Catan shard. For each roll of a 6, that unit suffers a mortal wounds. So again, it's fairly random. I think all of these 3 here are never going to do a huge amount of damage. So you're looking at killing between 1 and 3 models at the most, probably, with all of them really. Either, obviously Times Arrow, you can only kill 1 model, but you could potentially kill a model with multiple wounds. I'm thinking Times Arrow is probably the least useful, because it's circumstantial, and it's good if you're in an environment where there's multi-wounded units, but obviously not too many wounds, because you've got to roll higher than the amount of wounds. So if they've got 6 wounds, obviously it's useless. But maybe if you've got units like, say, Primaris Marines, which are 2 wounds, then potentially on a 3+, you can at least remove one of those from play. However, you can do D3 mortal wounds with the other ones. So yeah, they all seem pretty good, pretty average, and one doesn't stand out to me. If I'm missing something, then let me know, because I am very, very interested to get your feedback. These videos are all about learning, so hopefully you're learning from my videos, hopefully you're learning from all the comments that other people are putting on my videos, and I certainly am learning from you guys as well. So let's have your comments. Powers of the Catan, is there a particular standout one? Okay, let's have a look now at the Deceiver. Okay, so stat-wise, the Deceiver is exactly the same stats as the Nightbringer in terms of its strength and toughness, etc. One thing both of these Catans have is the fly special rule, so bear that in mind. If you do get into close combat, you can come out and still shoot both the Catan powers and of course any shooting attacks that you may have on the Nightbringer. Whilst I've got you here, I thought I would show you one of my conversions. So that's this guy here. Now he is my Void Dragon conversion. I've actually made him from the Nightbringer model, but as I've got you here, we're talking about Catans. I thought it would guess him out, so you can have a look. Check out this playlist here if you want to see me build and paint the Necron Void Dragon you've just seen. So yeah, the Deceiver has exactly the same stats basically as the Nightbringer. But it doesn't have the Gaze of Death, the shooting attack. It does have a Star God Fist. That sounds great, doesn't it? In reality, it is not actually that good because it's that limited 4 attacks. And this time, rather than D6 damage like the Nightbringer, it only does D3 damage, so even worse. It's a shame. It sounds so powerful, that fist, but it's not. A Star God Fist. However, the Deceiver isn't about close combat. You will probably end up getting him in close combat because that's primarily the way that your enemy is going to have to kill it, because it's obviously not going to be able to shoot it down, being the fact that it's a character and has less than 10 wounds. Now, if it does explode, it does exactly the same as the Nightbringer, so that is very nice. And well, I know we're talking about killing units from dying, but ultimately these models aren't exactly expensive. They're only just over 200 points, so I think they're quite reasonable for their points level. So what does the Deceiver have? Well, it has 2 special rules. The first one is Dread, which works within 12 inches of the Deceiver, and your enemy has to +1 to their morale roll. Now potentially you could combine this with the Flayed One's ability, so your enemy could be adding 2 to their dice roll for morale. Pretty useful. And then the big one, Grand Illusion. Now Grand Illusion is something the Deceiver has always had the ability to do, so I'm very, very pleased to see it still in the book. So effectively what you can do is, after deployment and before the game starts, is you have the facility to redeploy. Now you redeploy the Deceiver automatically, and then you're able to, if you want to redeploy D3 other units. So you've got a guaranteed 2 units that you can redeploy, and if you really need to deploy more than 2 units, of course you can use a command point to re-roll that D3. Now I would suggest the best thing to do is just think about using the guaranteed amount of units, so that's the 2 units, the Deceiver and 1 other unit, because of course it's all on a dice roll, and potentially you could roll a D3, get a 1 or a 2, and then you could re-roll it and get another 1 or a 2. So if you've got plans specifically built around moving more than that 1 extra unit, then you could be foiled. So I would suggest your best bet is to plan just to move 2, and if you can move anything else, then that's a bonus. So how does this help us? So one way would be to deploy in an unusual place to try and maybe bait your opponent into a different deployment. So you could put, for example, the Deceiver and maybe some destroyers, over in one flank in the corner. Try to get your enemy to siphon off some other units. Of course, most savvy players will know your plan, but you never know, they might forget or not realise, or potentially you don't have to move your model, you could leave him there. So you've got a bit of play there with mind games. You could put him in an area where your opponent doesn't know if you're going to move or not, and again he might just siphon off some of his units to try and deal with the units that you've put in the corner. And then depending on what your enemy does, of course you then have the option to redeploy, in that case, those 2 units and potentially other units to get into better positions for shooting. Now in the old days you had to redeploy in your deployment zone. Now you don't have to. Now you can redeploy anywhere within 12 inches of your enemy. Now sadly you're not able to assault after you've redeployed, but this is a good function to get particular units into range of your enemy, either for shooting or for distraction, for whatever reason, maybe just to get on an objective. And if your enemy is going to be deep striking in, maybe they're limited on the amount of units they have on the table, you could potentially deploy into their deployment zone. You know, you've got a lot of options with this. So I think the Deceiver is very powerful with this ability. It gives you lots of tactical options, and indeed you could make your whole army list around the Deceiver's ability. So for example, you could have a monolith, and rather than deep striking your monolith in, you could use the Catan's ability to get the monolith very, very close, and then any units that you have in reserve will come out, which also means that you could potentially assault first turn with things like Lich Guard, etc., or you could teleport a big unit of warriors through and just blast your enemy. And of course you can take the Deceiver over with the monolith, just try and use the monolith to stop your enemy from shooting at you using the nearest target, and then you've got a nice little bunch of distraction units in your enemy's deployment zone. You could potentially, if you roll good on your dice, take a Tomb Spider over there as well. That gets you into range with your Gloom Prism. And also if you've got a Fabricator Claw on there, you can help repair the monolith if it does take any damage. So that's one tactic that you could work towards if you wanted to invest the points in the monolith and the Deceiver, etc. So overall I think the Deceiver is the best option. I think it gives you more tactical advantages over the Nightbringer. Having said that, both of the Catans are definitely very usable, and to be fair, they're pretty reasonably costed for what they do. Now bear in mind, these are not beast in close combat. They can do some damage, but they're not going to totally annihilate your enemy, which it would be nice if they did, but they don't. But I suppose their points reflect that. However, they do offer a good distraction to your army, something which you can at least throw in the face of your enemy and know that they've got to deal with them. You know, they do have to deal with them, and as they are dealing with them, you are doing mission objectives with your flanks, with your warriors, with your immortals, etc. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in next week's tactical video. Beam me up.